Okay, think about this. What happens when a huge, sweeping new law casts its shadow, or maybe, its light, across pretty much every corner of American life?
Right.
You're talking everything, from the food you buy to the health care you can access, the balance in your bank account, even the very borders of the nation.
Yeah, it touches everything.
And maybe even more importantly, how do we hold a law like that, this kind of monumental legislation, up against the foundational promises our country was built on? Those timeless principles etched into the Declaration of Independence.
That's really the core question we're grappling with today, isn't it? And it's a vital one because you're absolutely right. These aren't just abstract policies being debated somewhere far away.
No, not at all.
They have very real, very tangible impacts on your daily life, your family's financial well-being, your access to essential services, and even the fundamental ways your government interacts with you, with its citizens.
Yeah.
Understanding that connection is just key to being well-informed.
Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Yeah.
This is where we take your complex sources, we dig deep, and we unearth those crucial insights, giving you a shortcut to being truly well-informed.
Hmm.
Today, we're embarking on a really crucial deep dive into a monumental piece of legislation, the Big Beautiful Bill, which is
Right.
formerly known as H.R. 1.
Right.
Our mission is to unpack its extensive changes, particularly looking through the lens of how they might uphold or maybe challenge the rights of the American people. And we're using those timeless principles from the Declaration of Independence as our guidepost, as we just mentioned.
And we'll also be, meticulously examining who really stands to gain the most from this, and perhaps who might face some new, maybe unforeseen challenges under all the sweeping provisions in this bill.
Yeah.
And as we go, we'll try to offer some very practical considerations for how you and your family can maybe start to plan for these really significant shifts. It's about anticipating, right? Not just reacting after the fact.
Exactly. And our sources today, we're pulling directly from the incredibly detailed text of H.R. 1 itself. And believe me, it's packed with a diverse array of policy shifts.
It really is.
And we're setting it right against excerpts from the Declaration of Independence, our nation's powerful statement of foundational rights and, well, some deeply felt grievances.
Yeah, grievances that still echo today in surprising ways.
Definitely. So prepare for some significant aha moments, because this really is about you and your daily life and how this bill might reshape your future, maybe in ways you haven't even considered yet. So to really start our deep dive, let's first set the historical stage a bit. Before the U.S. Constitution, before the framework of our federal government was even, conceived, there was the Declaration of Independence.
A foundational text.
Exactly. And this document was so much more than just a formal breakup letter with Great Britain. It was this profound articulation of what citizens believed they were inherently owed by their government.
What government should be.
And it was also a scathing, really detailed list of grievances against a monarchy that, in their view, had just utterly failed to provide for them. And these grievances, maybe surprisingly, serve as an incredibly relevant blueprint for the rights Americans have come to expect and, frankly, often take for granted today.
Precisely. And by looking closely at those core grievances, the very reasons the colonies declare independence, we establish this invaluable benchmark. It's like a lens, right, through which we can evaluate massive new legislation like the Big Beautiful Bill.
Yeah, measuring stick.
Exactly. For instance, one of the most fundamental grievances the colonists articulated was that King George III refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good.
Right.
And he even forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance. What this highlights is a really foundational principle of responsive governance, that leaders should actively approve and facilitate laws that genuinely serve the public's well-being, not just obstruct them for, personal or arbitrary reasons.
It's about government for the people.
It's about a government that works for its people, not against them. That's the core idea.
That's a powerful start, and it really sets the stage. And it ties directly into the next vital point you mentioned about representation and justice. The Declaration vehemently lamented that the king refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature,
A huge tipping point.
a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only.
This isn't just about voting right. It underscores the absolute vital importance of self-governance, where the people's voice isn't just heard, but genuinely counts, truly influencing the legislative process.
It's about having a real say.
A real say in the rules that govern your life. It seems so basic now, but it was revolutionary then.
And building on that, the founders also explicitly noted how the king obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary power.
Undermining the court. Exactly. And maybe even more chillingly, he made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries.
Wow.
This speaks directly to the absolute necessity of an independent judiciary, a system of courts and judges free from executive influence to ensure the fair, impartial, and consistent application of the law.
Crucial.
Without that critical independence, justice can very easily become, a tool for those in power rather than a universal shield for the people. It's a core tenet of liberty, truly.
And another major recurring theme of the Declaration was this concern about government overreach and harassment.
Yes, that comes through loud and clear.
The colonists famously stated that the king erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance.
Eat out their substance. Such powerful language.
Isn't it? And this grievance resonates so deeply with modern concerns about burdensome bureaucracy, excessive government intrusion, and maybe policies that seem to drain resources from citizens without providing clear or proportional benefit.
Yeah, you still hear echoes of that today.
It's fundamentally about ensuring that the machinery of the state doesn't become oppressive or, extractive.
And very closely tied to that idea of potential overreach was the crucial issue of military versus civil power.
Always a concern.
Grievances like keeping standing armies without the consent of our legislatures and affecting to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power directly highlight the profound American ideal of civilian control over the military.
Right.
The founders were deeply, deeply wary of a powerful standing army that could potentially be used against its own populace rather than serving under the democratic will of the people and their elected representatives.
It's about preventing a military state, essentially.
Exactly, keeping the military accountable to the people.
Then we move into core economic freedoms and due process ideas that really continue to shape our society today.
Foundational economic rights.
The Declaration vigorously protested cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, which fundamentally speaks to the right of individuals to engage in commerce freely without undue restriction.
Economic liberty.
It also railed against imposing taxes on us without our consent, a foundational principle that taxation must derive directly from the people's explicit consent given through their representatives. Still a hot topic.
Always.
And finally, depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury emphasizes the critical importance of due process, the right to a fair hearing and judgment by one's peers.
That bedrock rock.
These 3 points aren't just historical footnotes. They are truly enduring pillars of individual liberty and economic autonomy.
It's also fascinating how the document touched upon naturalization and immigration, isn't it?
Yeah, that was interesting.
Noting that the king endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither.
So even then, immigration policy was a source of conflict.
Absolutely. This grievance lays a very early groundwork for understanding policies related to immigration and, critically, who is considered part of the people benefiting from the nation's progress. It speaks to this nascent desire for growth, for innovation, and maybe a welcoming stance towards new inhabitants who seek to contribute.
A desire to grow the nation.
Yes.
And lastly, and perhaps most fundamentally, was the absolute failure of government to provide for the safety and security of its own citizens.
The most basic function, really.
Accusations like waging war, plundering, ravaging coasts, burning towns, destroying lives, and exciting domestic insurrections against the people reflect a complete and utter breakdown of the social contract.
It's the government turning against its own people.
At its very core, a government's primary duty is to protect its people, their lives, and their property. When that fails, well, everything else unravels.
So as we embark on this deep dive into the big, beautiful bill, it's really crucial to remember these historical grievances and the powerful ideals they articulated.
Keep them in mind.
They don't just belong in a dusty history book. They serve as a crucial living framework for evaluating any new major legislation that impacts your life, that impacts all our lives. We'll be consistently asking, does H.R. 1 align with, or does it significantly depart from, these core tenets?
Right.
Do its provisions move us closer to, or maybe further from, the vision of governance that our nation's founders laid out for us back in 1776? It's this dynamic tension, between the past and the present.
Okay, now let's dive into the big, beautiful bill itself. Let's explore some of its most immediate and tangible impacts, starting with the financial implications for you, your family, your household budget.
Let's do it.
We'll look first at how it aims to maybe uphold or enhance rights and benefits, providing what the bill's proponents would describe as significant relief and new opportunities.
Absolutely. And one of the most significant, really broad reaching areas of impact is in tax relief and credits. Several key provisions are being made permanent.
Permanent is a big deal.
It is. For instance, this bill takes the income tax rates that were initially set to expire, from the 2018-2025 period,
Hmm.
and it effectively makes them permanent, applying them retroactively to income earned after 2017. Now, what's the sort of hidden insight here?
Yeah, what's the deeper story?
This move essentially cements a specific economic philosophy for, well, the next generation. It shifts the burden of future tax debates away from a significant portion of the population and kind of embeds these rates as the new normal.
So locks them in.
It locks them in. It's a quiet but profound reshaping of the American tax landscape for decades to come. For individuals and families, this offers long-term predictability, which, for budgeting and financial planning is invaluable. You kind of know where you stand.
Okay, that makes sense. And for families specifically, a major highlight seems to be the enhanced child tax credit.
A very big one.
This bill dramatically increases the credit amounts. It's now $3,600 for children under 6 years old and $3,000 for children ages 6 to 17.
Significant increases.
But here's the really powerful part, from what I understand. It's also made fully refundable.
That's the key. Explain what that means.
Right, so fully refundable means that even if a family's tax liability, the amount they owe in taxes, is less than the credit amount, they can still receive the full amount as a cash refund.
Money back in their pocket, even if they owe zero taxes.
Exactly. The key requirement is that both the taxpayer and the qualifying child must have a Social Security number. So what's the broader impact here? This looks like a massive injection of funds directly into the pockets of families with children, particularly those in lower and middle income brackets.
Definitely targeted.
It aims to significantly reduce child poverty, which aligns quite directly with that declaration idea of promoting the general welfare by supporting the very foundation of society, its families. It really could be transformative for millions.
Beyond the child tax credit, there are a whole host of other permanent deductions and exclusions that are either continued or newly made permanent under this bill.
Okay, like what?
Whoa, for example, deductions for qualified educator expenses, that's for teachers buying supplies, higher education expenses, and health savings account, or HSA, contributions which let you save and spend on healthcare tax-free are all continued indefinitely.
Stability for those.
Stability. The standard deduction, which simplifies tax filing for millions, is permanently extended, along with personal exemptions. Even the alternative minimum tax relief for individuals, which is a complex provision ensuring higher income earners pay a certain minimum tax, is extended.
Okay.
And on the other end of the spectrum, significant estate and gift tax relief measures are also made permanent.
So impacting wealth transfer too.
Absolutely. This impacts a really wide array of groups, from working professionals diligently saving for retirement and education to those engaged in generational wealth transfer. These measures are designed to broadly reduce taxable income and lighten the load for diverse financial situations, quietly shaping how wealth is both earned and passed down.
So it seems like a really comprehensive suite of permanent financial relief measures. And the bill also permanently extends credits directly aimed at supporting home and family well-being.
That's right.
We're talking about credits for dependent care expenses, helping families afford child care adoption expenses, which are crucial for families growing through adoption.
Very important.
And even residential energy-efficient property credits, designed to encourage green home improvements. What stands out to me here is that these aren't just like abstract tax breaks. They seem designed to incentivize choices that benefit both the family unit and maybe broader societal goals, like energy efficiency.
Yeah, nudging behavior.
They ease very real financial burdens for people making those choices.
Furthermore, the bill permanently extends several exclusions from income. This means certain types of income or benefits simply aren't taxed at all.
Okay, examples.
This includes relief for qualified principal residents' indebtedness, essentially. If you had mortgage debt forgiven, maybe during a financial hardship, it wouldn't count as taxable income. That's huge relief for homeowners dealing with financial distress.
Wow, okay.
Employer-provided educational assistance, where your employer helps pay for your schooling, is also excluded from income, as are bicycle commuting reimbursements.
Little things, but they add up.
They do. These exclusions mean direct financial benefits to those who utilize them, encouraging positive behaviors like education and sustainable commuting while putting more money back in people's pockets.
And there's a new, particularly intriguing permanent exclusion that could significantly impact homeowners, the mortgage interest exclusion.
Ah, yes, this one's interesting.
This provision states a new permanent exclusion of interest income on loans secured by a principal residence. Can you break that down for us? Because on the surface, it sounds incredibly beneficial, maybe even revolutionary.
It is indeed significant. So historically, if you lent money and earned interest on it, that interest was generally taxable income, right?
Right. This new provision, however, says that if you, for example, finance the sale of your own home directly to a buyer-seller financing, or if you held a mortgage note and earned interest on it, that interest income is now permanently excluded from your taxable income as long as the loan is secured by a principal residence.
So if I hold the mortgage, the interest I receive isn't taxed.
Essentially, yes, under this provision for loans secured by a principal residence. This is a significant direct benefit for individuals or entities who act as lenders in residential real estate. The aim seems to be making home ownership more accessible or sustainable, perhaps by increasing the attractiveness of private financing or making certain investment structures more appealing.
Interesting. A clear financial incentive targeted at property owners and those involved in home finance.
Definitely.
Okay, shifting gears slightly. The bill also introduces some new tax deductions, but these are designed as temporary boosts, which is an important distinction to make.
Yes, temporary versus permanent is key here. For instance, there's a new provision, Section 224, that allows for a deduction up to $25,000 for qualified tips. This deduction, however, phases out starting at $150,000 in adjusted gross income, or AGI, and it's set to expire after 2028. How does this impact those who rely heavily on tips?
Well, this is a direct, albeit time-limited, benefit for many service industry workers. It acknowledges the unique financial situation of these workers by reducing their taxable income on those tips.
So more take-home pay for them, potentially.
Potentially, yes. However, it's important to note there's also a new requirement for employers to report tips more comprehensively. So while the deduction is a boon, the increased reporting could also lead to more scrutiny on tip income overall, kind of changing the dynamic between employers, employees, and the IRS.
A trade-off, then.
It's a targeted financial relief, but one that comes with new administrative layers. Definitely a trade-off.
And for hourly workers, there's the qualified overtime compensation deduction. This is Section 225.
Yeah.
This new measure allows a deduction of up to $12,500 or $25,000 for joint returns for qualified overtime compensation. Similar to the tips deduction, it has a phase-out starting at $150,000 AGI or $300,000 for joint filers, and it also expires after 2028.
Same expiration date.
A Social Security number is required, and employers will need to report this on W-2s. What's the broader impact here? This seems pretty direct.
It is very direct. It provides a substantial, though again temporary, financial benefit for many hourly workers who frequently earn overtime pay. It recognizes the significant extra effort involved in working those hours and aims to reduce the tax burden on that additional income.
So it makes working overtime more valuable.
Exactly. For a working family where overtime is common, this could translate into hundreds, maybe even thousands of dollars in annual savings, directly increasing their disposable income. The employer reporting requirement, similar to the tips deduction, ensures transparency but also means more rigorous tracking for businesses. It's a clear incentive for workers to take on more hours, as the reward is greater.
Okay. And for consumers looking to make a significant purchase, like a car, there's a new temporary deduction for interest paid on car loans for personal use. It's limited to $2,500 per year and runs from 2025 to 2028. What's excluded here, and who is this really targeting?
Right. The exclusions are important. This deduction doesn't apply to fleet sales, commercial vehicles, or any lease financing.
So just regular folks buying a car.
Exactly. This is clearly targeted relief for individual consumers purchasing vehicles for personal use. It aims to ease the financial burden associated with car ownership, especially maybe in a period of higher interest rates.
Makes sense.
Imagine a family needing a reliable car for work or school. This deduction could make the monthly payments slightly more manageable, potentially freeing up funds for other necessities. It's a direct, though temporary, stimulus for the consumer auto market designed to put a little extra money back into the pockets of everyday car buyers.
Now, here's one that has truly captured a lot of attention and sparked significant discussion. The introduction of what's been dubbed Trump accounts.
Ah, yes, Section 530A.
These are special savings accounts for individuals under 18. They have an annual contribution limit of $5,000, which is indexed for inflation. They offer tax-exempt growth and tax-free distributions for qualified education expenses. This sounds quite innovative.
It is innovative and potentially transformative in its structure. What's truly unique and potentially a game changer here are the general funding contributions these accounts allow.
Okay, what does that mean?
It means various entities, including certain nonprofits or 501c3 organizations, can make contributions to a qualified class of beneficiaries, for example, all children under 18 nationally, or maybe just specific age ranges, or even children within specific geographic areas, like a particular state or county.
So organizations could fund accounts for whole groups of kids.
Potentially, yes, if they meet the criteria. But here's the most striking part, the part that really got headlines. The bill explicitly highlights a $1,000 credit for children born after December 31st, 2024, deposited into one of these accounts.
A direct government contribution.
It appears so. And this payment is notably not subject to reduction or offset for other federal taxes or debts owed. It seems to offer a direct government contribution, almost like a birthright investment, into a child's future financial security from day one.
Wow. So this isn't just another 529 plan or savings account.
It seems structured differently, yes.
This could significantly increase educational access and maybe even wealth building for children from all backgrounds, particularly those in targeted qualified classes who might not otherwise have such savings or generational financial support.
That seems to be the potential.
It feels like a direct government push towards future financial security for younger generations. It almost prompts the question, is this a subtle shift towards a form of, I don't know, universal basic capital or income for children, ensuring a baseline of financial opportunity from birth?
That's a big question, but the structure is certainly suggestive of a different approach. It's a profound statement about the government's perceived role in future generations' economic well-being.
Okay, while the big beautiful bill offers what its proponents call significant benefits, it also introduces some potential challenges and requires careful planning for individuals and families, especially those relying on federal benefit programs.
Right. This is the other side of the coin.
This is where we see some really significant realignments of services and requirements, which, might echo some of the declaration's concerns about government actions impacting the people.
Let's start with SNP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, often known as food stamps.
Okay.
This bill significantly modifies work requirements for able-bodied adults. Now, there are specified exceptions, people under 18 or over 65, those medically unfit, people caring for a child under 6 or someone incapacitated or if they're pregnant.
So some groups are exempt.
Yes, but the general thrust is clearly to encourage self-sufficiency through employment for those deemed able-bodied. However, the less obvious implication is that this could pose significant challenges for those who genuinely struggle to meet these requirements due to various personal circumstances not explicitly covered by those exceptions. Think unstable housing, lack of transportation, mental health issues not deemed medically unfit.
Right. Life is complicated.
Exactly. It could potentially leave vulnerable individuals without crucial nutritional support. It's a clear policy shift that prioritizes work activation over, say, universal access, potentially making the safety net less accessible for some.
And there's an even more direct financial impact with NSNAP, right? Something about internet costs.
Yes, this one is quite direct. The bill now explicitly states that internet service fees can no longer be used in computing the excess shelter expense deduction for SNAP.
Okay, translate that. Why does that matter?
It matters because in our increasingly digital world, internet access is truly crucial, right? For job searches, remote education, telemedicine, even just basic communication with family and services.
It's almost a utility now.
Many would argue it is. So removing it from the shelter deduction calculation directly affects low-income households who rely on SNAP. It fundamentally contrasts with the broader idea of ensuring the public good by making essential services more accessible.
So it makes affording internet harder for those on SNAP.
Precisely. For a family already stretching every dollar, losing this deduction means a direct hit to their ability to afford a basic necessity for modern life.
Wow.
Furthermore, the bill introduces a new state cost-sharing structure for SNAP administration that could have a ripple effect down to beneficiaries.
How so?
While federal matching funds for SNAP administration will now decrease if a state's payment error rate, meaning mistakes in determining eligibility or benefit amounts, exceeds certain thresholds.
So states get penalized for errors.
Essentially, yes. If a state's error rate is low, say less than 6%, the federal share remains at 50%, but it drops if the errors are higher. What's the strategic intent? It aims to incentivize states to be more stringent, more careful in their administration.
Which sounds good on the surface.
Right. But it could in turn impact beneficiaries if states become overly cautious or implement stricter, maybe more complex screening processes just to avoid those financial penalties. It could inadvertently create barriers to access as states prioritize compliance over perhaps ease of application for eligible individuals.
Okay, that makes sense. A potential unintended consequence. Now, moving to Medicaid, the federal state program providing health care for low-income individuals. There's a significant and, frankly, rather surprising change here.
Yes, the moratorium.
The bill imposes a moratorium lasting until September 30, 2034, that's a full decade,
Well,
on implementing rules designed to streamline Medicaid application, eligibility, enrollment, and renewal processes.
a 10-year pause on simplification.
What's the profound implication of hitting the pause button on simplification for such a long period? It seems counterintuitive.
It is counterintuitive if the goal is ease of access. This is a major structural change that directly impacts potentially millions of beneficiaries. By freezing efforts to simplify the process, it could inadvertently make it harder for people to get on or stay on Medicaid, creating more administrative hurdles, more red tape,
So keeping the system complex.
or preventing it from becoming simpler. Yes. Imagine a single parent trying to navigate a complex, paper-heavy application process while also working and caring for children. This moratorium means a decade of missed opportunities to make the system more user-friendly, potentially leading to eligible individuals falling through the cracks simply due to bureaucratic complexity.
That really challenges the principle of accessible governance for public well-being we talked about earlier.
It certainly seems to.
And there's also a new community engagement activity requirement for states to mandate for certain individuals seeking Medicaid.
Yes, this is similar to some proposals we've seen before.
It applies to those aged 19 to 65 who are not pregnant, not entitled to Medicare Part A or B, and not otherwise eligible for broader Medicaid categories. These individuals would need to engage in activities like work, community service, job search, or education, totaling 80 hours per month.
80 hours a month, that's like a part-time job requirement.
Pretty much. And non-compliance could result in disenrollment, although there are exceptions for the medically frail or primary caregivers. This feels like a balancing act between personal responsibility and healthcare access.
It is, and it's a very delicate one. While the stated aim is to balance personal accountability with access to healthcare, the potential for disenrollment as a penalty for noncompliance is significant.
Losing healthcare is a huge penalty.
Huge! This could lead to increased administrative burdens for both the states who have to track all these activities and the individuals who have to document and report them. For someone struggling with unstable housing, unreliable transportation, or maybe a lack of affordable childcare, meeting an 80-hour per month requirement could be an insurmountable hurdle.
Leading them to lose coverage.
Potentially, yes, leading to a loss of essential healthcare coverage. It could disproportionately affect those already at the margins, potentially increasing the uninsured population in specific demographics.
Another truly substantial change is found in the area of alien Medicaid eligibility, Section 71109.
A very significant shift here.
Effective October 1st, 2026, aliens will no longer be eligible for non-emergency Medicaid services unless they fall into very specific categories, such as certain non-immigrants, refugees, or asylum seekers. What are the broader implications for immigrant communities and their access to essential health care? This sounds huge.
It is huge. This provision marks a profound shift, directly impacting the ability of many immigrant communities, including many legally present immigrants, to access routine, non-emergency healthcare services. Think checkups, managing chronic conditions, preventative care.
So not just undocumented immigrants.
No, the language seems broader unless they fit specific exemptions, like refugee status. For example, a legal permanent resident who doesn't fit into one of the specific exempted categories might lose access to ongoing medical care. This could potentially shift their health issues into the emergency room system later on, which is far more expensive for everyone.
Right.
It raises significant questions about whether this aligns with that declaration sentiment about encouraging migration and preventing the obstruction of population growth if those new populations are then denied basic safety nets. It could lead to increased public health challenges and a greater reliance on already strained charitable care systems.
Okay. On a more beneficial note for some, the bill does revise the home equity limit for long-term care eligibility under Medicaid.
Yes, an increase here.
It increases it from $688,000 to $1 million, and it's indexed for inflation. This seems like a measure designed to protect family assets, particularly the family home.
It is exactly that. This aims to protect assets for those requiring long-term care services, offering peace of mind to families who might otherwise have to deplete their home equity, a significant asset for many middle-class families, in order to qualify for Medicaid assistance with nursing home costs, for example.
So it helps preserve that asset.
For many older Americans, their home is their most valuable asset, and this change helps preserve that legacy for their families while still allowing them to receive necessary long-term care. It's a targeted financial protection within the Medicaid system.
However, there's also a specific prohibition on federal payments through Medicaid to certain prohibited entities, including their affiliates, subsidiaries, successors, and clinics for a one-year period.
Section 711113.
This is a policy choice that seems to directly impact funding channels for specific organizations, likely those involved in reproductive health care.
Indeed. This policy choice directly impacts how federal funds flow within the healthcare system, particularly affecting organizations like Planned Parenthood, which offer a wide range of health services beyond abortion, including contraception, STD testing, and cancer screenings.
Right.
By restricting these funding channels, it could, by extension, affect access to care for the populations they serve, particularly low-income individuals who rely on them. It forces individuals to seek services elsewhere, assuming alternatives are available and accessible, or potentially go without care altogether.
So it's a political decision impacting healthcare access.
It represents a clear political decision embedded within a healthcare funding bill, influencing patient access based on the entity providing care, rather than solely the nature of the care itself. It creates a significant access challenge for certain populations.
Okay, shifting gears slightly to unemployment benefits. Section 7 of 3001 prohibits federal funds for unemployment compensation payments to individuals whose base period wages equal or exceed $1 million.
The so-called jobless millionaires provision.
Right. This is explicitly aimed at preventing them from receiving unemployment benefits. What's the intent versus the potential impact here?
Well, the clear intent is to prevent the perceived abuse of unemployment benefits by very high-income individuals who might not, arguably, need this specific safety net during job transitions. It's framed as prioritizing limited federal resources.
Makes intuitive sense to some.
Yes, but even high-income individuals can experience sudden job loss and significant economic disruption. While they might have greater personal resources, this still means that if someone earning over $1 million loses their job, they won't receive any federal unemployment support during their job search.
Okay.
And state agencies will now be required to certify and verify income for this provision, adding another layer of administrative scrutiny to the unemployment system, potentially for everyone.
Got it. Now, for those utilizing healthcare exchanges under the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, there are stricter eligibility requirements now for the premium tax credit, the subsidies that help people afford coverage.
Yes, more verification up front.
Applicants will now need to verify household income, eligibility, Social Security number or taxpayer identification number, and eligible alien status before receiving premium assistance. If this information isn't verified, the credit can be disallowed. What does this mean practically for applicants trying to get coverage?
Practically, it places an increased burden on applicants to provide extensive and verified documentation before they can get the financial help to afford their insurance. Imagine a scenario where a family loses job-based coverage and needs immediate health care, but they get stuck in a bureaucratic limbo waiting for income verification from, say, a past employer or government agency.
Delays could mean gaps in coverage.
Exactly. This can cause delays and in some cases lead to the disallowance of credits if information isn't provided or verified quickly enough, potentially leaving individuals without affordable coverage precisely when they need it. It aims for greater integrity in the system, sure, but it trades off ease of access for stricter controls, more hurdles.
And the bill further restricts ACA subsidies by disallowing premium tax credits for certain coverage enrolled in during special enrollment periods.
This is another significant restriction.
This has potentially big implications for individuals who seek to enroll in insurance outside of the standard open enrollment period, right? Like if they have a qualifying life event.
Precisely. Special enrollment periods are designed to allow individuals to sign up for health insurance outside the annual open enrollment window due to major life events, things like job loss, marriage, divorce, childbirth, moving.
Life happens outside of November.
Exactly. Disallowing premium tax credits during certain of these periods fundamentally changes the safety net aspect of the ACA. It means that even if you qualify for a special enrollment, the insurance might suddenly become unaffordable without the credit you were expecting,
Leaving people exposed.
leaving people exposed during precisely the moments they need support the most. It's a strategic narrowing of the ACA's subsidy structure, likely aimed at encouraging enrollment only during designated periods, but it comes at the cost of flexibility for life's unpredictabilities.
Okay, student loan reforms are also a major part of this bill. Under Education Title 8, there are significant new loan limits.
Big changes here, especially for grad students.
Beginning July 1st, 2026, federal direct PLUS loans for graduate and professional students will be terminated.
Gone.
Instead, new annual limits of $100,000 for graduate students and $200,000 for professional students will apply to federal direct unsubsidized Stafford loans. There's also a new $65,000 aggregate limit for dependent student PLUS loans, which parents often take out. How will these changes fundamentally alter student loan borrowing for higher education, especially for those expensive advanced degrees?
These changes will profoundly reshape the landscape of higher education financing, no question, particularly for those pursuing advanced degrees. Previously, graduate PLUS loans had a much higher, sometimes effectively unlimited, borrowing potential up to the cost of attendance.
Right, they covered the
I
gap.
covered the gap. Now, with strict annual and aggregate limits on the only remaining federal option, the unsubsidized Stafford loans, many graduate and professional programs, particularly in fields like medicine, law, dentistry, specialized sciences, will become much more expensive for students to finance solely through federal loans.
So bigger funding gaps for students.
Potentially huge gaps. This will directly impact access and affordability. It could push more students towards riskier private loans, which often have fewer protections, or it might simply make certain career paths less accessible to those without significant personal or family wealth to cover the difference. It's a major shift in how the government supports advanced education.
Additionally, the bill mandates that the Secretary of Education ensure all borrowers transition to income-based repayment plans by July 1st, 2028, with older repayment plans sunsetting. A new repayment assistance plan is introduced for loans originating after July 1st, 2026.
Streamlining repayment options.
What's also notable here is the new authority for the Secretary to access IRS data directly for income verification for these plans. While this aims to streamline the process, maybe make it easier for borrowers, it also raises some important privacy considerations, doesn't it?
It's definitely a dual-edged sword. On one hand, moving all borrowers to income-based repayment aims to simplify the notoriously complex system and theoretically ensure payments are always affordable relative to income, which could prevent defaults. The new repayment assistance plan presumably builds on this idea.
That sounds potentially good.
It could be. On the other hand, giving the Secretary of Education direct, ongoing access to IRS tax data for income verification is a significant expansion of federal power into personal financial data. While it might streamline the process for borrowers, no more submitting pay stubs, it undeniably raises privacy concerns about how that data will be used, how securely it will be stored, and potentially shared between agencies.
Less control for the borrower over their info.
For borrowers, it means less direct control over their income reporting for loan purposes, as it will likely be automatically pulled from their tax records. It's a definite shift towards greater government oversight and data integration in managing student loan repayment.
Okay. And finally, in this section on individual impacts, there's a new excise tax on certain remittance transfers.
Section 70604.
This applies to money sent out of the U.S. from financial institutions, not subject to specific federal laws, or if the transfer isn't funded by a debit or credit card. What's the direct financial impact here, particularly on immigrant communities who often send money home?
This new tax will have a very direct and tangible financial impact, especially on immigrant communities who frequently send remittances, money transfers, to family members abroad. Often, this is crucial support for basic living expenses, education, or small investments in their home countries.
A lifeline for many families.
Absolutely. Imagine a hardworking immigrant in the U.S. sending, say, $500 home to their parents each month. This new excise tax means that a portion of that transfer will now be subject to an additional tax, directly reducing the amount that reaches their family or increasing the cost of sending it.
So it costs more to send money home.
Yes. When we frame this in relation to the Declaration's principle of cutting off our trade or imposing taxes without our consent, it prompts a critical question. Does this tax, while designed to generate revenue, disproportionately burden a specific segment of the population? And does it align with the spirit of fostering economic liberty for all residents? It adds a new layer of financial burden to an already essential service for many families. Okay, now let's transition to the broader economic and business impacts of the Big Beautiful Bill. Then we'll bring our constitutional lens, that declaration framework, back into sharp focus to really scrutinize these provisions.
Absolutely. When we talk about economic drivers and strategic investments, the bill includes some really significant pro-business measures that could reshape industries. For instance, in its finance title, Title VII, the bill makes permanent the allowance for businesses to fully expense certain business property and domestic research and experimental expenditures. What does this full expensing really mean for businesses, and what's the strategic intent behind making it permanent?
Full expensing is a massive incentive for businesses. Essentially, it means they can immediately deduct the full cost of eligible new equipment, machinery, or qualified research expenses in the year they actually incur those costs, rather than having to spread those deductions out over many years, which is called depreciation or amortization.
So a bigger tax break up front.
Exactly, a much bigger tax break immediately. This dramatically lowers their taxable income right away, which frees up significant cash flow. The strategic intent is pretty clear: to spur immediate investment in new machinery, technology, software, and innovation. The hope is that this, in turn, leads to increased productivity, job creation, and overall economic growth.
Supporting economic liberty.
You could frame it that way, yes.
Yeah.
It supports economic liberty by giving businesses more control over their capital in the short term and incentivizing them to expand and modernize, potentially making U.S. businesses more competitive globally. It's a powerful engine for capital formation, at least in theory.
And to further boost domestic capabilities, particularly in manufacturing, the bill enhances the Advanced Manufacturing Investment Credit.
Section 70308.
It increases it from 25% to 35% for property placed in service after December 31st, 2025. This seems directly aimed at strengthening manufacturing within the U.S., aligning with goals of, national economic resilience and bringing jobs back.
Precisely. It's a targeted incentive to encourage companies to build or expand factories and production facilities here in the United States, particularly for advanced technologies.
And looking squarely to the future, maybe even the final frontier, the bill provides for spaceports, places where rockets launch and land, to be treated like airports for the purpose of tax-exempt facility bonds.
Yeah, this is fascinating. Section 70309.
With special rules for ground leases, too. What's the vision here? This feels very forward-looking.
It's absolutely forward-looking. This is a clear and direct signal from the government aimed at stimulating significant investment in the burgeoning commercial space industry. By treating spaceports like airports for these tax-exempt bonds, it makes it much cheaper for private companies to borrow money for constructing and upgrading space launch facilities.
Lowering the cost of building launch sites.
Significantly. Imagine a future where commercial space travel, satellite deployment, even asteroid mining are commonplace. This bill is laying the financial groundwork for that vision. It's about national prestige, securing a leading role in the global space economy, and recognizing commercial space as a strategic industry for the 21st century.
Okay. The bill also permanently extends what are called Qualified Opportunity Funds, or QOFs, and the New Markets Tax Credit.
Yes, Section 70417, 70417, 70417.
These are programs explicitly designed to incentivize investment in economically distressed communities.
There's the purpose, yes.
Yeah.
To draw private capital into areas that have been historically overlooked.
What stands out as interesting are the modifications to QOFs in this bill. There are changes to how assets are valued for tax purposes and the inclusion of a specific rural area definition for qualified opportunity zones, or QOZs, with special rules for existing structures in rural QOZs allowing 50% of the adjusted basis. How does this kind of fine-tuning aim to direct investment more effectively?
So, qualified opportunity funds, just as a refresher, are investment vehicles that allow investors to defer or even avoid capital gains taxes by reinvesting those gains into businesses or properties within designated low-income census tracts, these QOZs.
A tax break for investing in poor areas.
Essentially, yes. Making these programs permanent means that this powerful incentive to revitalize overlooked communities is here to stay, providing long-term certainty for investors. The modifications are quite clever and seem targeted.
How so?
By specifically defining rural areas and giving special, more favorable tax treatment to investments in existing structures within those rural zones, the bill is clearly trying to funnel investment into smaller, often neglected towns and rural communities, not just focusing on urban redevelopment.
So trying to spread the wealth beyond cities.
That appears to be the goal. It's about incentivizing development in places that typically don't see much private capital flowing in, breathing new life into forgotten main streets, and creating jobs where they are desperately needed. Though, of course, the actual impact will depend heavily on investor uptake and the types of projects funded.
Right. However, with these incentives, the bill introduces extensive new reporting and oversight requirements for QOFs, Sections 70418 and 70419.
Yes, a lot more paperwork.
Funds will now need to report on their investments, the properties they hold, the number of employees at their portfolio companies, even down to specific industry codes, and the number of residential units created or rehabbed.
Very granular data.
And there are significant penalties for noncompliance. We're talking $500 per day, with maximums up to $50,000 and even higher for intentional disregard, potentially up to $250,000. Magnetic media reporting is mandated. Plus, the Secretary of the Treasury is required to conduct a study and report to Congress on the actual impacts of QOFs.
Using real economic indicators.
Right, using indicators like job creation, poverty reduction, new business starts, and changes in property values, comparing QOZs to similar non-QOZ areas. What does all this transparency and accountability push mean for the program?
This is almost certainly a direct response to criticisms and concerns that some early QOF investments weren't truly benefiting the distressed communities as intended, or that the program was primarily being used as a tax shelter for wealthy investors developing luxury projects without significant local impact.
So trying to ensure it actually works as advertised.
Exactly. The extensive reporting requirements and the hefty penalties send a clear message. The government wants to see proof that these tax-advantaged investments are actually creating jobs, reducing poverty, and spurring new businesses in these zones. The required study and report are crucial because they will hopefully provide hard data to determine if this multi-billion-dollar incentive program is actually working as intended or if it needs further reform.
An effort for accountability.
It's an effort to ensure taxpayer money, through the forgiven taxes, is effectively leveraging private investment for genuine community uplift, rather than just benefiting a select few developers or funds. It highlights that interesting tension between incentivizing investment and ensuring that investment achieves public goals.
Now, for smaller businesses and maybe gig economy workers, there seems to be some welcome relief in reducing the reporting burden for small transactions.
Yes, Sections 70432 and 70433 offer some simplification.
The bill repeals a recent revision to the de minimis rules for third-party network transactions. That's for payments you receive through platforms like PayPal, Venmo, or Etsy. It reinstates the higher thresholds for getting a 1099-K form.
Back to the old rules.
Back to $20,000 in 200 transactions, instead of the much lower $600 threshold that was briefly in place and caused a lot of confusion.
Right. That $600 threshold was very controversial.
It also increases the threshold for requiring general information reporting, like the 1099 MISC form for miscellaneous income, from $600 to $2,000. How does this impact the everyday entrepreneur or someone with a side hustle?
This is a significant practical win for the vast number of small-scale entrepreneurs, independent contractors, freelancers, and gig workers across the country. That $600 threshold meant that almost anyone doing even a minor side hustle, selling crafts online, driving occasionally for a rideshare app, tutoring was potentially generating a 1099-K or 1099 MISC, adding a layer of tax reporting complexity for often very small amounts of income.
A lot of paperwork for small sums.
Exactly. By increasing these thresholds significantly, the bill dramatically reduces the administrative burden and tax reporting complexity for millions of people. It means less paperwork, fewer headaches at tax time, and maybe more time for individuals to actually focus on their businesses or gigs. It fosters a more nimble and less cumbersome environment for micro entrepreneurs.
Okay. And finally, in this business section, the bill repeals the amortization requirement for qualified film and television productions, reinstating immediate expensing. Section 70434. How does this benefit the entertainment industry?
This is a clear and direct financial benefit primarily to film and television production companies. Previously, under recent tax law, they had to amortize or deduct gradually over time the costs of their productions. Now, under this bill, they can go back to immediately expensing those costs in the year they occur.
So faster tax write-offs for Hollywood.
Essentially, yes. It accelerates their tax deductions significantly, which improves their cash flow and reduces their tax liability in the short term. The likely intent is to incentivize more domestic filmmaking and television production, keeping those jobs and the associated economic activity within the U.S., rather than seeing productions move overseas for cost savings. It's a targeted tax break designed to boost a specific, high-profile creative industry.
Now let's talk about energy and environment because the big beautiful bill introduces some truly significant policy shifts here, shifts that will likely have very long-term consequences.
Definitely some major changes in direction here.
On the fossil fuel front, the bill mandates minimum oil and gas lease sales. Section 50101, 50103, 50104
Yeah.
requires at least 4 lease sales per fiscal year in specific western states like Wyoming, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Montana, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Nevada, and also Alaska.
Naming specific states.
And 2 lease sales per year for the outer continental shelf, offshore. There's even a requirement to offer at least 50% of the available land nominated for leasing. And the bill includes provisions for expedited leasing, permitting, and something called commingling. What's the overarching message here? This sounds like a big push.
It's an undeniable, very significant push for increased domestic fossil fuel development. It's not just allowing leasing. It's mandating a baseline level of oil and gas leasing activity on federal lands and waters. It streamlines the process, removes potential delays, and ensures that a substantial amount of public land and offshore areas are made available for extraction.
A clear prioritization.
It reflects a very clear policy prioritization towards maximizing domestic energy production from traditional sources. The proponents would argue this enhances energy independence and could lower energy costs. But it also clearly signals a shift away from recent trends that might have emphasized conservation or renewable energy development on those same federal lands. It's a strategic move designed to bolster the fossil fuel industry for potentially decades to come, directly influencing our national energy mix and, of course, our environmental footprint.
In contrast, the bill details the imposition of new acreage rent and capacity fees for wind and solar rights-of-way on federal land, Section 503001. There are also provisions for late payment fees and termination of those rights-of-way. This seems to introduce new financial hurdles specifically for renewable energy projects on public lands.
It certainly does. While the fossil fuel sector sees mandates for leasing and expedited processes, the renewable energy sector faces new financial implications when using federal land. By imposing these new acreage rents and capacity-based fees for wind and solar projects, it directly increases the costs for developing clean energy projects in these areas.
Making renewables more expensive on federal land.
Potentially, yes. Imagine a solar farm developer now facing significantly higher upfront and ongoing costs just for the right to use that federal land. This could potentially slow down the deployment of new utility-scale wind and solar projects, making them less economically competitive compared to traditional energy sources on federal land, despite broader environmental goals or climate targets. It's a clear example of the bill using fiscal policy levers to shape the energy market in a specific direction.
And here's where we see an even more pronounced reprioritization of federal funding. The bill details the extensive rescission of funds for various green and environmental programs.
Yes, Title III, Title V, Title VI contain numerous rescissions. Sections 3002, 50302, 60008 through 6024.
This includes pulling back funds for things like the Green and Resilient Retrofit Program for multifamily housing, funds allocated under the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act, often related to phasing out potent greenhouse gases, money for greenhouse gas corporate reporting systems, methane emissions reduction programs, environmental product declaration assistance, and even environmental and climate justice block grants aimed at helping disadvantaged communities. This looks like a clear and direct withdrawal of federal support from many climate and environmental initiatives.
It represents a monumental policy shift, really. It's not just a reduction in future funding, it's a cancellation, a clawing back of previously allocated funds for a wide array of programs aimed squarely at addressing climate change, promoting energy efficiency, reducing pollution, and supporting environmental justice initiatives.
So what's the strategic implication of pulling back all this money?
It signals a strong, unmistakable deprioritization of federal action on climate change and broad environmental protection. It shifts resources, both current and planned, away from green initiatives towards other areas funded in the bill, like defense or border security. For those concerned about environmental health, air and water quality, and long-term climate stability, this is a profound statement about the nation's direction. It could significantly slow down transitions to cleaner energy, hinder efforts to reduce emissions, and potentially disproportionately impact communities most vulnerable to environmental degradation and climate impacts. It's a direct policy choice about what constitutes the public good in this context.
Furthermore, clean energy tax credits face termination or significant restriction. Sections 70507 through 70515.
A whole range of them.
The bill details the termination or modification of numerous clean energy tax credits. Things like the credits for energy-efficient commercial buildings, for building new energy-efficient homes, credits for producing clean hydrogen, and the big ones for clean electricity production and investment. But crucially, it introduces a material assistance from prohibited foreign entities clause.
This is a really important new condition.
This restricts eligibility for certain remaining or modified credits if the construction of the project involves significant assistance materials, technology, maybe financing from entities connected to a covered nation. And those nations are listed as China, Russia, Iran, or North Korea.
Geopolitics entering tax policy.
Exactly. There are also accuracy-related penalties and supplier misstatement penalties for noncompliance. This isn't just about clean energy anymore, is it? It feels like something bigger.
No, you're right. It's a national security and economic competition play layered onto energy tax policy. While it might seem counterintuitive on the surface to cut or restrict clean energy credits if climate is a concern, this prohibited foreign entities clause is incredibly significant. It's designed to counter perceived geopolitical rivals.
How does it do that?
This isn't just about where the solar panels are made. It's a strategic move that could force a complete reevaluation of global supply chains and international partnerships in green technology. The clear intent is to try and reshore manufacturing, reduce reliance on geopolitical rivals, particularly China in the clean energy space, and address national security concerns by preventing these covered nations from benefiting from or unduly influencing U.S. clean energy development funded by tax credits.
Well, what's the potential downside?
The less obvious implication, or maybe the direct trade-off, is that it risks slowing down green energy transitions here in the U.S. if access to cheaper or currently more advanced international technology and components is suddenly curtailed or becomes more expensive. It could eventually create new domestic industries and jobs, yes, but it also introduces significant complexities, potential delays, and likely higher costs for green energy projects in the short to medium term due to these restricted global supply chains.
Okay. And the bill also introduces project sponsor opt-in fees for environmental reviews, Section 50501.
The pay-to-play for faster reviews, some might call it.
Project sponsors can now choose to pay a fee calculated as 125% of the anticipated government costs for their environmental assessments, EAs, or environmental impact statements, EISs. If they pay, the agencies are then targeted to complete EAs within 180 days and the more complex EISs within 1 year. What's the intent here? Faster approvals.
The stated intent is clearly to expedite the often lengthy environmental review process for large infrastructure or energy projects by allowing project sponsors to essentially pay for faster agency turnaround times. Historically, these NEPA reviews can take years, causing significant delays and uncertainty for developers.
So developers pay a premium for speed.
Theoretically, yes. By paying a premium, 125% of the agency's cost, sponsors can theoretically get their assessments completed within a much more compressed time frame. While this could certainly accelerate certain projects deemed critical or desirable, it also places a direct and higher cost burden on project sponsors just to get through the environmental assessment phase.
Does it raise other concerns?
It definitely raises questions about fairness and equity. Does allowing sponsors to pay more for a faster review potentially compromise the thoroughness or objectivity of the environmental assessment? Does it create a two-tiered system where well-funded projects from large corporations get preferential treatment in the regulatory pipeline, while smaller projects or those from less wealthy sponsors face the standard, potentially much longer, timelines? It's an attempt to fix delays, but the mechanism is controversial.
Okay, turning now to defense and infrastructure. The bill makes truly substantial appropriations for the Department of Defense, sections 2001, 2003,
A
2013.
significant focus on military funding.
This includes measures aimed at improving the quality of life for military personnel, things like enhanced housing allowances, recruitment and retention bonuses, special pays, temporary lodging expense reimbursements, impact aid for local school districts near bases, and support for military spouse professional licensure.
Addressing personnel needs.
But it also includes huge investments in hardware, major funding for shipbuilding, for integrated air and missile defense systems, procurement of various missiles, interceptors, advanced radar systems, and development of hypersonic strike programs. What's the overarching message about national security priorities here?
This represents a robust and pretty unequivocal commitment to strengthening national defense across the board. The quality of life improvements for military personnel and their families recognize the sacrifices made, aiming to retain experienced personnel and boost morale, which is crucial for readiness.
And the hardware.
The massive investments in shipbuilding, missile defense, and cutting-edge technologies like hypersonic weapons are clearly geared towards maintaining technological superiority over potential adversaries and projecting U.S. power globally. In the context of the Declaration's grievances about security, this aligns directly with the government's fundamental role in providing for the common defense and ensuring the safety and security of its citizens against external threats. It's a significant infusion of resources into maintaining a strong, technologically advanced military posture.
On the civilian infrastructure front, the bill appropriates funds for Coast Guard Mission Readiness Section 4001, including new cutters and shore facilities, and for air traffic control improvements under the FAA Section 4003, things like upgrading telecommunications, radar systems, and runway safety enhancements. These sound like pretty crucial, non-controversial investments.
They absolutely are. These are critical investments in maintaining essential public safety infrastructure. The Coast Guard is vital for maritime security, search and rescue operations, drug interdiction, and environmental protection along our coasts and waterways.
And air traffic control.
Air traffic control improvements are directly linked to the safety and efficiency of air travel for millions of Americans every single day. These provisions address core governmental responsibilities for infrastructure and public services that everyone relies upon, regardless of their political affiliation. They're foundational to a functioning modern economy and society.
The bill also highlights an almost $10 billion appropriation for NASA missions, Section 4005, specifically calling out Mars missions, the Artemis program to return to the Moon, and the broader Moon to Mars program. This includes funding for infrastructure improvements at manned spaceflight centers in places like Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, and Virginia. How should we frame this kind of investment in space exploration?
This is really an investment not just in scientific advancement, but also in national prestige, technological leadership, and inspiring future generations. The continued substantial funding for ambitious missions like sending humans back to the Moon and eventually onto Mars signifies a long-term commitment to space exploration and discovery.
More than just science.
Oh, absolutely. It fuels innovation across multiple fields, inspires students to pursue STEM careers, creates high-tech jobs, and maintains the U.S. at the forefront of global space capabilities. While it might not have the immediate daily financial impact of a tax cut, it speaks volumes about the nation's long-term aspirations and its role in pushing the boundaries of human knowledge and exploration.
Okay, now let's turn to a truly major focus of this bill: border security and immigration enforcement, Homeland Security Title IX, and Judiciary Title X.
A huge amount of funding and policy changes here.
There's a massive $46.55 billion appropriation specifically for border infrastructure and what's termed a wall system, Section 90001. This includes funding for new or replacement barriers, access roads along the border, and technology like cameras, lights, and sensors. This is obviously a direct response to border security concerns and represents a truly substantial investment.
Indeed. This is a monumental investment in physical and technological barriers along the U.S.-Mexico border primarily. It represents a clear policy choice to prioritize border security through greatly increased infrastructure and surveillance capabilities. The sheer scale of the funding indicates a strategic commitment to a specific approach to border management, one focused heavily on deterrence and physical control.
The goal being?
The stated goal is to deter unlawful crossings, enhance national security by preventing the entry of dangerous individuals or contraband, and give federal agents more tools to control the flow of people and goods across the border. It reflects a very direct response to ongoing, often heated, debates about border control, national sovereignty, and immigration policy.
Complementing this infrastructure spending, the bill allocates $2.2 billion specifically for 22,000 single adult immigration detention beds. Section 9000.
Expanding detention capacity significantly.
The bill also defines a family residential center as a facility used to detain family units of aliens who are encountered or apprehended near the border or ports of entry. This signifies a clear intent and capacity to detain more individuals, including families.
This increased funding for detention beds reflects a policy shift towards detaining a greater number of individuals apprehended at the border or within the country, rather than releasing them pending immigration proceedings, which is sometimes referred to as catch and release.
And the family centers.
The specific definition and funding related to family residential centers clarifies the intent to detain entire family units together, rather than separating parents and children, which was a highly controversial practice in the past. This overall approach aims to manage and process the flow of individuals more quickly and potentially to deter future unlawful crossings by showing consequences.
But there are concerns.
Of course. For critics, it raises significant concerns about humanitarian conditions within detention facilities, the psychological impact of detention, especially on children, the due process rights of detainees, and the immense long-term costs associated with maintaining such extensive detention infrastructure. It's a direct operational response to current challenges in immigration enforcement, but one with significant human, ethical, and financial implications.
The bill further establishes a state border security reinforcement fund, Section 9004.
Encouraging state involvement.
This fund is designed to provide grants to eligible states and local governments, specifically for purposes like apprehending individuals identified as criminal aliens, and also for relocating unlawfully present aliens away from small population centers to larger ones, presumably with more resources. This seems to incentivize state and local involvement in what is typically federal immigration enforcement.
It does. This fund represents a significant effort to expand the federal government's immigration enforcement footprint by leveraging state and local law enforcement resources. By offering grants, it financially encourages states and localities to participate more directly in apprehending and relocating individuals deemed unlawfully present or identified as criminal aliens.
Let's go.
It aims to create a more unified and comprehensive enforcement strategy across different levels of government, a sort of force multiplier. However, it also raises complex questions about the proper roles of local police forces versus federal immigration agencies and the potential impact on trust and cooperation between law enforcement and immigrant communities, particularly if local police are perceived primarily as immigration enforcers. This could make communities less safe if people fear reporting crimes.
However, amidst all this enforcement funding, the bill also details increases to various fees for immigration services, Section 10001.
Making legal immigration more expensive.
Things like fees for employment authorization documents, work permits, applications for adjustment of status, green cards, and even the electronic system for travel authorization, ISPA, required for visitors from visa waiver countries. These fee increases seem to place a direct financial burden on individuals trying to follow the legal immigration process.
They absolutely do. These fee increases represent a direct financial burden on individuals and families navigating the already complex and often expensive legal immigration system. Whether someone is seeking to work legally, become a permanent resident, or simply visit the U.S. temporarily, the costs are going up.
Why raise fees?
The rationale often given is to make the immigration services, primarily run by USCIS, more self-funding, reducing reliance on taxpayer appropriations. However, for many immigrants, these fees can already be substantial, representing a significant barrier, especially for lower-income families. Raising them further makes access to legal immigration pathways even more expensive, potentially excluding those who simply cannot afford the new costs and perhaps inadvertently pushing some towards unlawful status. It shifts a greater financial responsibility directly onto the shoulders of the applicants themselves.
And the bill provides even more funding for enhanced immigration enforcement overall, Section 100.002, 100.00, 108.
Broad increases for ICE and DOJ.
This includes appropriations for immigration and customs enforcement, ICE operations, the Department of Justice, DOJ, including grants to state and local governments, specifically for apprehending criminal aliens, combating gang activity, and addressing drug and human trafficking and funding for general immigration enforcement activities.
A wide net.
A very specific and potentially controversial detail here is the funding earmarked for criminal and gang checks for unaccompanied alien children,
Yeah.
12 years of age and older. This includes, quote, examination of such unaccompanied alien children for gang-related tattoos and other gang-related markings. This particular provision raises direct questions about privacy, profiling, and the treatment of minors.
This is a highly significant and, frankly, alarming provision to many observers. While the broader funding aims to enhance national security and combat genuinely illicit activities, the specific targeting of unaccompanied children for criminal and gang checks, including invasive physical examinations for tattoos or markings, raises profound ethical and legal concerns.
Even if they are non-citizens.
Even for non-citizens, particularly minors who often arrive traumatized and seeking protection, it touches on fundamental issues of bodily autonomy, privacy rights, the presumption of innocence, and the potential for harmful stigmatization based on appearance or origin. It essentially treats vulnerable children arriving alone as potential criminal suspects first and foremost. While the stated intent might be enhancing safety and security, the methodology sparks a serious discussion on the appropriate limits of government power, regardless of citizenship status, especially when applied to minors under 12. It's a very aggressive approach.
Additionally, the bill explicitly prohibits federal funds from being used for certain immigration-related activities, Section 100.007,
Cutting off funding for support services.
such as providing legal services for aliens in immigration proceedings, funding alternatives to detention programs like electronic monitoring or community-based case management, or supporting non-governmental organizations, NGOs, involved in humanitarian activities at the border. This significantly restricts funding channels for services that often support immigrants and asylum seekers.
This prohibition dramatically restricts or eliminates federal funding for a range of services that often provide crucial support to immigrants navigating complex legal processes, seeking asylum, or participating in less costly and arguably more humane alternatives to traditional detention.
So who does this impact?
Organizations that offer legal aid, humanitarian assistance, shelter, or community-based alternatives to detention will now find themselves cut off from federal dollars for these specific activities. This can lead to significantly less access to legal representation for asylum seekers and others in removal proceedings, potentially greater reliance on expensive detention beds, and a reduced role for NGOs that often fill critical gaps in government services, particularly at the border.
A policy choice again.
It's a clear policy choice to funnel federal resources almost exclusively into enforcement, detention, and physical barriers, rather than investing in legal orientation, support services, or alternative management strategies.
And finally, amidst all this spending, the bill notes a $5 trillion increase to the public debt limit. Section 72001. This is often misunderstood. Can you clarify its purpose?
Yes, this is critical to understand. This is not an authorization for $5 trillion in new spending. Instead, it's about allowing the U.S. government to borrow the money needed to meet its existing financial obligations, obligations already approved by Congress through past spending bill and tax laws.
So it's like increasing the credit card limit to pay bills already incurred.
That's a decent analogy. The public debt limit is the total amount of money the United States government is legally allowed to borrow to meet its existing legal obligations, like paying for Social Security, Medicare, military salaries, and interest on the national debt. Without increasing the limit when needed, the government would eventually default on its debts, which would have catastrophic consequences for the U.S. and global economy. So, while $5 trillion is a huge number, raising the debt limit is a necessary procedural step to ensure the nation can continue to pay its bills and maintain financial stability.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Now let's apply our constitutional lens, specifically using those principles and grievances from the Declaration of Independence to these broad economic and enforcement measures we've just discussed.
Let's do it.
We're going to really scrutinize the Balancing Act in H.R. 1 and see how it aligns with or maybe departs from those foundational rights and concerns our country was founded upon.
Exactly. Let's revisit the Declaration's powerful grievance about the king who, quote, erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance.
That swarms of officers line is potent.
It is, and we can certainly connect this historical grievance to the bill's significant increase in funding for immigration enforcement personnel, the expansion of detention capacity, and the new fees imposed for various immigration services. The question arises, and it's a fair one. Could the bill's provisions, particularly those related to apprehending and detaining aliens, And maybe the potential for expanded border patrols to interact more frequently with citizens in border regions be seen by some as aligning with, or perhaps departing from, the spirit of protecting all individuals within the nation's jurisdiction from excessive government intrusion and burdensome bureaucracy.
It's that tension again. Security versus potential harassment.
It's a fundamental tension.
And that's not just an abstract point, is it? The specific mention we discussed earlier, the criminal and gang checks for unaccompanied alien children, including the examination for gang-related tattoos and other gang-related markings, really highlights this potential conflict.
It brings it into sharp relief.
Even for non-citizens, particularly vulnerable minors, does this specific provision infringe on fundamental human dignity or privacy rights? It certainly raises important questions about the scope and limits of government power and how it's applied, especially when directed at a population that is often already traumatized, defenseless, and seeking protection.
Another direct and very stark parallel can be drawn from the Declaration's specific concern about the king obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither.
Right, hindering immigration back then.
And we see a potential modern echo of that concern, perhaps, in the new restrictions this bill places on SNFP eligibility and non-emergency Medicaid eligibility for aliens.
How so?
Well, you have to ask the question, does this bill, through these specific provisions, effectively act to discourage migrations or raise the conditions for successful integration into American society by severely limiting access to crucial social safety nets for non-citizens, including many who are legally present?
Creating more barriers.
It arguably creates a more pronounced two-tiered system of access to essential services based primarily on immigration status, which could be seen as undermining the long-held, though often debated, American principle of facilitating the growth and integration of new populations who come seeking opportunity.
Okay. And then there's the core principle of taxation without our consent from the Declaration, combined with the Constitution's preamble goal of promoting the general welfare. H.R. 1 presents a truly complex balance sheet here, doesn't it?
Extremely complex.
On one hand, you have broad middle-class tax relief, permanent extensions of popular deductions, the enhanced child tax credit things many people will cheer and see as promoting their welfare.
Benefits are clear for many.
But on the other hand, there are new targeted excise taxes, like the one on remittance transfers, which disproportionately affects immigrant communities. And there's the explicit large-scale redirection of funds, the sweeping rescission of environmental program funding, the prohibition on payments to prohibited entities in healthcare.
Taking from Peter to pay Paul, some might say.
Right. This prompts us to consider whose consent is most valued or reflected in this overall tax and spending system. And how does the collective impact of these choices truly define the general welfare that's being promoted? Is it a welfare conceived broadly for all residents and future generations? Or is it more narrowly focused on certain segments or priorities, perhaps at the expense of others, like environmental protection or access to certain healthcare providers? It's a fundamental reprioritization with winners and losers.
And consider the administration of justice grievance from the Declaration. While this bill doesn't directly restructure the judiciary itself,
No new courts or anything.
no, but its significant increase in funding for immigration enforcement, coupled with the new higher fees for immigration services and the defunding of legal aid for immigrants, could indirectly affect access to due process for non-citizens trying to navigate the complex immigration legal system. If you can't afford the fees or find legal help, is your access to justice truly meaningful?
A practical barrier to justice.
It can be. Moreover, the requirement for states to be in full compliance with federal mandates on sharing immigration status information, like 8 U.S.C. 1373, in order to receive certain Department of Justice grants could subtly impact local legal processes or, as we mentioned, erode public trust between immigrant communities and state and local law enforcement agencies. If people fear local police are acting primarily as immigration agents, it can undermine cooperation needed for investigating all crimes, thus indirectly impacting the broader administration of justice.
And the environmental aspect, again, linking back to the public good.
Yes, the extensive rescission of environmental and climate-related funding, alongside the termination or restriction of many clean energy tax credits, directly challenges our contemporary understanding of what constitutes the public good in governance.
A fundamental disagreement on priorities.
Absolutely. This bill undeniably prioritizes maximizing fossil fuel development and significantly disinvests in federal programs aimed at promoting green initiatives or mitigating climate change. For some, this aligns perfectly with priorities like economic growth through traditional energy and achieving energy independence. For others, however, it fundamentally undermines a broader public benefit related to environmental health, preserving natural resources, ensuring global climate stability, and protecting the well-being of future generations. It raises a very deep question. Which public good is being served, and for whom, when such stark policy shifts occur?
However, it's also important to acknowledge, as you pointed out, that the bill does contain provisions that seem to directly uphold another key principle from the Declaration, the idea of government providing redress of grievances.
Yes, it's not all one-sided. Section 103 is a key
The
example.
amendments to the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, REA.
Exactly. This part of the bill significantly expands eligibility and increases the compensation amounts available for individuals who were exposed to radiation from atmospheric nuclear weapons testing or from uranium mining, milling, or ore transportation, often referred to as downwinders or uranium workers.
Helping people harmed by past government actions.
Precisely. This is a direct act of the government acknowledging historical harm caused by its own past actions, taking responsibility, and actively working to compensate those individuals and families who suffered health consequences as a result. It's a powerful illustration of a government upholding a key foundational principle of justice and accountability, demonstrating that even within a massive, complex bill like this, specific provisions can directly serve to rectify past wrongs and ensure the public good for those affected. It shows the multifaceted, sometimes contradictory nature of large-scale legislation.
Okay, now let's try to bring all of this together with some practical guidance for you, our listener, especially for lower-income individuals and families, or maybe anyone who might be significantly impacted by these changes. How should you start to plan and adapt to the shifts laid out in the big, beautiful bill? What are some strategic adaptations for potentially vulnerable populations?
This is truly crucial, and the key word is proactive. Don't wait for things to happen. For SNP and Medicaid recipients, for instance, there's a critical need to understand and potentially adapt to these new eligibility hurdles we discussed.
The work requirements, the community engagement.
Exactly. Those community engagement mandates for Medicaid and states that adopt them and the altered work requirements for SNP are not minor tweaks for those affected. They could fundamentally change your access to essential benefits. Our advice: stay highly informed about how your specific state chooses to implement these federal changes.
Because states have discretion.
Yes, states often have significant discretion in how they administer these programs. The federal law sets the framework, but the state rules matter immensely. Seek out relevant support services or advocacy groups in your local community, legal aid societies, food banks, community health centers, immigrant support organizations. They are often the first to understand and interpret these complex changes and can provide invaluable assistance in navigating the new rules.
Don't assume anything.
Definitely do not assume your current eligibility or benefit level will remain unchanged without checking the specific rules in your state and proactively engaging with your state agencies if required.
Okay. What about for students and their families facing those big student loan changes?
For students and families, the landscape of higher education financing is shifting profoundly, especially for those planning on graduate or professional degrees. We strongly advise current and prospective students to thoroughly research the new, much lower annual and aggregate loan limits for graduate and professional studies, keeping in mind the termination of federal direct PLA-US loans for these groups starting in 2026.
Plan for potentially bigger funding gaps.
Yes, you need to figure out how you'll cover the potential difference, whether through savings, scholarships, institutional aid, or potentially private loans, but be very cautious with private loans. Also, explore the criteria and benefits of the new workforce Pell Grants mentioned in the bill, particularly if you're considering vocational training or certificate programs in high-demand career paths, as these grants are specifically designed to support those non-traditional, often shorter-term, pathways to employment.
And the repayment changes.
It's vital to understand the new income-based repayment options, like the Repayment Assistance Plan, and the implications of the Secretary of Education now having direct access to your IRS data for income verification. This means your required payment will likely adjust automatically based on your tax filings, so plan your finances and budgeting accordingly. Understand how your income translates to payments under the new system.
Okay. And for immigrant families, the changes seem particularly stark for them.
For immigrant families, the impacts are potentially severe across multiple fronts. There are truly significant shifts in access to basic social safety nets like SNAP and non-emergency Medicaid for many non-citizens. Beyond that, the increased financial burdens from higher immigration service fees and the new remittance tax cannot be overstated.
Both of the advice.
We strongly advise seeking reliable legal counsel from qualified immigration attorneys or reputable accredited community support services specializing in immigration law. They are essential for helping you navigate these highly complex, interlocking changes. They can help you understand your evolving rights, determine your eligibility under the new rules, and identify any available resources or potential exemptions you might qualify for.
Don't go it alone.
Absolutely. Do not try to navigate these waters alone. The stakes are too high, affecting healthcare, food security, legal status, and family finances. These changes will require proactive planning, meticulous record keeping, and expert guidance to avoid unintended, potentially devastating negative consequences.
Looking now at the broader socioeconomic impact, this bill clearly involves truly significant trade-offs. Understanding them is key to seeing the bigger picture, right?
Absolutely. It's not just about individual provisions, it's about the cumulative effect and the underlying priorities. For example, the collective impact of the changes to S&P and Medicaid eligibility and requirements, alongside the prohibition on funding specific prohibited entities in healthcare, could realistically create a more stringent, perhaps less accessible social safety net for certain populations.
Making it harder to get help.
Potentially, yes. This has the potential to exacerbate existing inequalities in health outcomes and economic stability, or even increase poverty or hardship for some vulnerable groups by making it harder for them to access crucial support when they need it. It reflects a philosophical shift in the conception of the safety net itself, perhaps more conditional, less universal.
And it highlights shifting national priorities.
It's a very clear illustration of shifting national priorities and resource allocation. The bill makes truly substantial investments in national defense and border security areas framed as crucial for national sovereignty and physical safety. These massive investments are balanced, however, against equally clear cuts, restrictions, or defunding in areas like social programs, environmental protection, and certain types of international aid or engagement.
The fundamental question.
This raises the fundamental question for each of us as citizens. Does this particular balance truly serve the public good or the general welfare across all segments of the population? Or does it implicitly prioritize certain interests, certain definitions of security over others? It's important to consider who benefits most directly from the new investments and who might bear the indirect costs or face new challenges due to the programmatic changes and funding reallocations. It's a deep societal choice about values and priorities being made through the legislative process.
And economically, while the tax cuts for businesses and the permanent full expensing provisions are designed to stimulate economic growth, create jobs.
That's the theory.
Right, the theory. It's worth considering how those benefits might actually be distributed. Will they be concentrated in certain sectors or primarily benefit shareholders and executives? Or will they broadly lift wages and create widespread opportunity? That remains to be seen.
And conversely, those new material assistance from prohibited foreign entities clauses embedded in the clean energy tax credits could significantly reshape global supply chains for things like batteries, solar panels, and wind turbines. This could impact domestic job creation in those sectors, maybe positively in the long run if domestic manufacturing ramps up, but possibly negatively in the short term if projects stall due to supply disruptions or higher costs.
A complex web.
It's a very complex web of intended and potentially unintended economic impacts that won't necessarily be felt uniformly across the country or across industries. It will almost certainly create winners and losers in perhaps surprising places.
Ultimately, this whole deep dive really showcases how legislative changes, even those that seem minor or technical in isolation, can fundamentally reshape the relationship between citizens and their government. They influence our daily choices, our long-term opportunities, our access to essential services, and maybe even the very fabric of our society. Understanding these dynamics isn't just, an academic exercise. It's essential for navigating your own life and participating effectively in our democracy.
Absolutely essential.
So, as our valued listener, we sincerely encourage you to stay informed and engaged. Continue to seek out detailed, impartial information about major legislative changes like the Big Beautiful Bill. Remember that understanding the nuances, not just the headlines, of such bills is crucial for active citizenship and for making informed decisions for yourself, your family, and your community.
And identify opportunities where you or your family might benefit. Perhaps there are specific new tax credits, educational grants, or business incentives you can leverage. And just as importantly, Proactively prepare for specific challenges that might arise from eligibility changes or funding cuts that affect you. Knowledge truly is power in navigating these complex, evolving shifts in policy.
And we leave you with this final provocative thought. As we reflect on these extensive shifts in policy and funding, impacting everything from your personal finances and healthcare access to our national borders, defense posture, and environmental direction, what responsibility does each citizen bear in truly understanding how policy reshapes the promise of American liberty and opportunity?
And perhaps, how can we collectively ensure that future legislation, regardless of who proposes it, consistently strives to uphold the enduring principles of justice, equality, and promoting the general welfare laid out in our nation's founding documents, like the Declaration we discussed today? It's a question for all of us to ponder.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this exploration empowers you to engage more deeply and thoughtfully with the policies shaping our world.